Hello and welcome to Read and Learn English, the channel where beautiful stories help you improve your English step by step. Today you're going to enjoy a very special story. This is not just any story. This is a story written for both your heart and your learning. Whether you are here to practice your reading or to improve your listening skills, you are in the right place. This story is told in clear, slow, and emotional English, perfect for English learners of all levels, especially A2 to B1 learners. You will read at your own pace, you will hear real storytelling, and most importantly, you will feel something. The title of this story is She Was Just a Teacher, but She Changed 30 Lives. It's about a woman named Miss Lewin, a quiet teacher who wore no fancy clothes, made no big promises, but brought something very powerful into her classroom: love, care, and belief in her students. Through simple words and real emotions, this story helps you practice English while also reminding you of what really matters in life: kindness, hope, and the power of one person to make a difference. As you listen, try to repeat the sentences. Try to pause and read with me. Feel every word. Understand every sentence. Let the language enter your heart. Because at Read and Learn English, we don't just study English, we experience it. So, are you ready to begin? Let's read together. Let's listen with care. And let's learn English, one beautiful story at a time. Chapter 1. The Woman in the Plain Dress. The morning bell rang. The sound echoed through the long school hallway. Students slowly walked into Class 8A. Some looked sleepy. Others were talking and laughing. The room was loud, full of teenage energy and tired feet. But then, everything went quiet. A woman stood at the door. She wore a plain brown dress and carried a small black bag. Her shoes were simple. Her hair was tied back neatly. She did not wear makeup or bright colors. She was not young, but her face looked calm and kind. Her eyes were soft, and her smile was gentle. She looked around the classroom and said in a quiet voice, "Good morning, Class 8A. My name is Miss Lewin. I will be your new teacher." There was silence for a few seconds. Then the students stood up, as they were taught. "Good morning, teacher," they said together. Miss Lewin nodded. "Thank you. You may sit." She walked slowly to the teacher's table. She placed her bag down and picked up a piece of chalk. On the blackboard, she wrote just 2 words: New Beginning. Then she turned around and asked, "What do these words mean to you?" No one answered. A few students looked at each other. Some played with their pens. One boy at the back whispered, "Another boring teacher." Miss Lewin didn't seem to hear him. Or maybe she did, but she said nothing. She waited, quietly. Her eyes moved across the room, looking at each face. Finally, a girl near the front raised her hand. "It means starting something again?" Miss Lewin smiled. "Yes, a new beginning is a chance to start fresh. A clean page. A different day." She looked at the class again. "Today is a new beginning for me, and for you." The students didn't know what to say. They were used to loud teachers, strict rules, and angry voices. Miss Lewin was different. Too quiet, maybe. Too soft. Some students thought, she won't last a week. After the short introduction, she started the lesson. It was a reading class. She opened a book and began to read. Her voice was slow, clear, and warm. Not like a newsreader, more like a mother reading to her child. She read about a boy who lost his way in a forest but found a light. Her voice painted pictures in the minds of the students. The classroom, for a short while, felt like another world, full of trees, stars, and hope. She paused and said, "Now, who would like to read the next part?" No hands went up. Again, she waited. No pressure, just silence. Finally, a shy boy in the second row raised his hand. "I can try, teacher," he said softly. "Thank you," said Miss Lewin, nodding. He read slowly. His voice shook a little, but she listened with full attention. When he finished, she clapped once. "Well done. Very clear." The boy smiled, a small smile, but it was real. After the class, some students whispered to each other, "She's too quiet. She's kind of strange. She's nice, though. Maybe she's just like the others. We'll see." But something had already started to change, something small, like a seed under the ground. The next day, Miss Lewin came to class again. Same dress, same shoes, same soft smile. She greeted every student by name. Not just "hello," but "good morning, Coco." "Nice to see you again, Theory. Is your headache better today, Nyane?" The students were surprised. Most teachers forgot names after the first week. But Miss Lewin remembered. She didn't talk much about marks or punishments. She didn't shout. But her eyes noticed everything. The girl who always sat alone, the boy who never brought lunch, the student who never smiled. And slowly, the students began to feel something strange, seen, heard, safe. She was just a teacher, quiet, gentle, with no loud voice or big promises. But by the end of that first week, 30 hearts had started to open, just a little. And that was the beginning of everything. Chapter 2. The Boy Who Stopped Speaking. Coco sat in the last row of the classroom, always near the window. He never raised his hand. He never asked questions. He never laughed, smiled, or even spoke. The other students sometimes forgot he was there. The teachers didn't call on him anymore. 2 years ago, Coco's father died in a car accident. Since that day, he had not spoken a single word at school. People said his silence was strange, but Miss Lewin didn't think it was strange at all. From her very first week, she noticed Coco. She didn't try to force him to speak. She didn't ask him to read out loud or answer questions. But each day, she walked past his desk and said something simple, something soft. "Look at the clouds today, Coco. They look like big cotton balls, don't they?" Or, "The rain was heavy this morning. I love the sound it makes on the roof." Sometimes she said, "I saw a bird building a nest in the schoolyard." It made me smile. Coco never replied. He just sat quietly, his eyes often staring out the window. But he heard her. Every word. Other teachers said, "Don't waste your time on that boy. He doesn't care." But Miss Lewin believed something different. She believed that silence was not the same as not caring. She knew his heart was still listening, even if his mouth stayed closed. She never pushed. She never made him feel small. One day during break, Coco sat alone reading a book. Miss Lewin sat nearby on the school steps. She didn't go to him. She just looked up at the sky and said to no one in particular, "The wind smells like jasmine today." There was silence, and then something happened. A soft voice, quiet as a falling leaf, answered, "Yes." She turned her head slowly. Coco was looking down at his book, not at her, but his lips had moved. He had spoken, just one word. But it was enough. Miss Lewin didn't make a big deal of it. She simply smiled and said, "I thought so too." Then she stood up and walked back inside. She didn't tell anyone. That moment belonged only to Coco. The next morning, she left a small white flower on Coco's desk. There was no note, no words, just the flower. Coco picked it up and looked at it for a long time. Then carefully, he placed it inside his book. He still didn't speak in class, but something had changed. His eyes were brighter. His hands didn't shake when he wrote. One day, he even helped another student with a math problem. The other boy said, "Thanks, Coco." And Coco nodded. Slowly, quietly, his world was opening again. Miss Lewin never spoke about it to the class, but her way of teaching changed a little. She added more poems, more stories, more quiet moments in her lessons. Once, she read a story about a tree that stood still in the storm. After class, she left a small drawing of that tree on Coco's desk. No words, just the picture. Coco smiled as he looked at it. He didn't say anything, but inside something was healing. At the end of the month, there was a school event, a poetry reading. Each student had to choose a short poem to read aloud on stage. When the teacher organizing the event saw Coco's name on the list, she crossed it out. "He doesn't speak," she said. "Don't make him uncomfortable." Miss Lewin quietly uncrossed his name and said nothing. The day before the event, she gave Coco a small piece of paper. On it was a short poem, only 4 lines long. A tree stands still in heavy rain, but inside it sings a quiet song. It does not shout, it does not run, but still it grows, strong and long. She didn't say he had to read it. She just said, "This poem made me think of you." Then she walked away. The next day, when Coco's name was called, the room fell silent. No one expected him to stand. But slowly, carefully, Coco got up from his chair and walked to the front. He held the paper in both hands. His voice was soft, but it was clear. He read the poem, word by word. When he finished, no one clapped at first, not because they didn't want to, but because they were in shock. Then someone started, and the whole room followed. The applause grew louder and louder. Coco smiled. It was a small smile, quiet, like him, but it was real. And from that day on, Coco spoke. Not all the time, not loudly, but he spoke. And when people asked him later why he started talking again, he only said, "Because someone spoke to me. Not to get answers, but just to be kind." And in the back of the room, Miss Lewin smiled too, because she knew one voice had returned to the world, and that mattered. Chapter 3. Letters on the Wall. One morning, Miss Lewin walked into the classroom carrying a small wooden box. It wasn't a gift box. It wasn't a toolbox. It looked like an old mailbox, the kind you see outside a home in the countryside. The students watched her quietly as she placed it on the corner table near the window. Then she picked up a piece of chalk and wrote on the blackboard. No names, just feelings. The class stared. She turned and smiled gently. "This box is for your thoughts. You can write anything you like. Happy things, sad things, dreams, fears, worries. But don't write your name. It's not for me to know who you are. It's for you to say what you feel." Some students laughed softly. One girl whispered, "That's silly." Another boy said, "What's the point?" But Miss Lewin didn't explain more. She simply placed a stack of small papers beside the box and said, "If you want to write, write. If not, that's okay too." At first, the box stayed empty. For 2 days, no one put anything inside. It sat there, quiet and alone, like a forgotten decoration. But on the third morning, when Miss Lewin opened it, there was one folded paper. She opened it carefully. It read, "I feel lonely every day, even when I'm with my friends." She read the words twice, her heart growing heavy. She didn't know who wrote it, but that didn't matter. She folded the note and placed it back into the box. Then she wrote her reply on a new piece of paper and pinned it to the wall near the blackboard. It said, "Sometimes we smile outside but cry inside. You are not alone. Keep going. Better days will come." The students noticed it. They whispered. They looked at the mailbox. They looked at Miss Lewin, but she said nothing. The next day, there were 2 new letters in the box. One said, "I want to leave school. I feel useless here." Another said, "No one listens to me at home. I just want someone to care." Miss Lewin read them quietly. Then she replied to both and pinned the answers on the wall just beside the first one. Her replies were gentle and full of hope. One read, "You are not useless. You are still growing. Even the tallest tree was once a seed." After a week, the wall had 7 notes. After 2 weeks, it had 15. By the end of the month, there were over 30. Some were short. "I miss my grandma. I'm scared I won't pass. My dad shouts too much." Some were longer, full of pain, confusion, and silent tears. But Miss Lewin read every single one. And for every letter, she wrote a reply, not with answers, but with kindness. One day, a student asked, "Why do you do this, teacher? You don't even know who wrote them." She looked at the growing wall of paper and said softly, "Because feelings need a place to breathe. And even a stranger's kind words can become light in a dark room." The classroom started to feel different. Students who never spoke began to look up. Boys who once made fun of others stopped laughing and started listening. Girls who used to sit alone found quiet company. The wall full of letters became more than paper. It became a mirror of their hearts. One Monday, a letter appeared that simply said, "Thank you, Miss Lewin. I feel a little less alone now." She smiled when she read it, not because it was praise, but because it meant the box had done its job. Someone had felt seen. The wall grew so full that she added another board beside it. It became known as the Hope Wall. Visitors to the class would stop and read the notes. Some would cry. Some would smile. One teacher said, "This is not just a classroom. It's a healing room." Miss Lewin never told anyone who wrote what. She never asked. She didn't try to guess. To her, every letter was a voice. Every voice mattered. And every reply was a hand, reaching back through the silence. In a school where marks and mistakes were always counted, she gave something else: space. Space to feel. Space to speak without fear. Space to be human. And slowly, 30 young hearts learned something deeper than grammar or math. They learned that it's okay to feel, and it's brave to share, even if it's just on a small piece of paper, dropped quietly into a wooden box by the window. Chapter 4. The Broken Window. It was a hot Tuesday afternoon. The sun burned through the classroom windows, and the air felt heavy. The students of Class 8A were tired. Some boys had just finished a long exam. Tempers were short, voices were loud. 2 boys, Tet and Lin, began arguing over something small: a missing pen, a rude joke. No one could remember exactly what started it. But suddenly, the argument turned into shouting, then pushing, then fists. Before anyone could stop them, Lin threw his school bag across the room. It hit the side of a desk, bounced off, and smashed into the glass window. The sharp sound of breaking glass cut through the air. Everyone froze. The room went silent. Miss Lewin was not in the room at that moment. She had stepped out to speak with another teacher. But the sound of the broken window brought her running. When she entered, she saw the shattered glass on the floor, the wide eyes of frightened students, and two boys standing apart, breathing heavily, fists clenched. A few minutes later, the headmaster arrived. He looked at the broken glass and shouted, "Who did this?" No one answered. "Fine," he said. "If no one will speak, then the whole class will stay after school for 1 week. You'll clean the schoolyard every afternoon. If you don't want to tell the truth, then all of you will suffer." He turned to leave, but Miss Lewin stepped forward. "Sir," she said calmly, "may I try something different before we punish the whole class?" The headmaster frowned. "What do you mean?" "Please give me 1 hour with the class," she said. "No punishment. Just 1 hour. If nothing changes, I'll support whatever decision you make." He stared at her for a long moment, then gave a small nod. 1 hour. That's all. That afternoon, Miss Lewin didn't begin a lesson. She moved the chairs into a circle. Then she sat down in one of them. The students followed, unsure and quiet. "This is not about blame," she said gently. "This is about stories. Everyone has one. And sometimes, pain hides inside us, waiting for a way out. Let's listen to each other." No one spoke at first. The air felt thick. Then, to everyone's surprise, Atet raised his hand. He didn't stand up. He just looked down and said, "I'm sorry." Miss Lewin nodded. "Thank you, Het. Do you want to tell us more?" He hesitated. Then the words came, like water breaking through a dam. "I get angry easily," he said. "At school, at home. I feel like no one hears me, like I don't matter. At home, my father never talks to me unless I do something wrong. At school, I try to joke around, but people think I'm annoying. Today, when Lin said that thing about my father, I couldn't take it." Lin looked down. Slowly, he said, "I'm sorry too. I didn't mean to hurt you. I don't know. I guess I wanted to look tough." Miss Lewin didn't interrupt. She let the silence fill the room. Then another boy spoke. "Sometimes I fight because I feel invisible." A few heads turned. The boy shrugged. "It's true. When I make trouble, at least someone notices me." Miss Lewin's eyes filled with tears, not from sadness, but from something deeper. Understanding. "You are not invisible," she said softly. "You are seen. You are heard, but sometimes we must learn new ways to speak, not with fists or anger, but with truth." One by one, the students began to open up. They shared things they had never said before. A girl spoke about the fear she felt every night when her parents argued. A boy admitted he didn't know how to read well and got angry when people laughed at him. Another said he felt stupid, even though he tried his best. No one laughed. No one judged. For the first time, the classroom became more than a place for books. It became a space for hearts. At the end of the hour, Miss Lewin stood and said, "We are not perfect. We all carry something heavy. But when we speak kindly and listen deeply, something magical happens. We begin to heal." The next morning, Tet and Lin came early to school with a broom and a dustpan. They cleaned the broken glass themselves. They also wrote a letter to the class, apologizing and promising to do better. They placed it on the Hope wall. The headmaster never gave the punishment. He read the letter, looked at Miss Lewin, and said, "I think your way worked better." From that day on, whenever a problem happened in Class 8A, Miss Lewin didn't start with rules or shouting. She started with a circle and a story. Chapter 5. The Dream Map. One bright morning, Miss Lewin entered the classroom carrying something large under her arm. It was rolled up like a scroll, tied with a string. The students watched with curiosity as she walked to the front and slowly unrolled it across the teacher's desk. It was a huge, blank sheet of white paper, almost as wide as the blackboard itself. She smiled at the class and said, "Today, we're not going to learn from a book. Today, we're going to learn from you." The students looked confused. One boy raised his hand. "What do you mean, teacher?" Miss Lewin held up a box of colored pencils, markers, and crayons. "This," she said, pointing to the giant paper, "is your dream map. I want each of you to come forward and draw one dream, something you want to do or be in the future. It can be anything, a job, a place, a hope, a wish. There are no wrong answers." At first, no one moved. Drawing in class, sharing dreams. It felt strange, but Miss Lewin waited patiently, her soft eyes full of encouragement. Finally, a shy girl from the second row named May stood up. She walked to the front, picked a blue crayon, and began to draw. A small house with a window, a tree, and a smiling woman behind a table. When she finished, she whispered, "I want to open a bakery like my aunt's." The class smiled. Next came Lynn, the same boy who once broke the window in anger. He picked a red marker and drew a rocket shooting into the stars. "I want to become an astronaut," he said, "or maybe build rockets." One by one, the students stepped forward. One drew a microphone. He dreamed of being a singer. Another drew a stethoscope. She wanted to be a doctor for children. A girl who rarely spoke drew books stacked high. "I want to open a library in my village," she whispered. Coco, the boy who once never spoke, quietly drew a small garden with butterflies. "I want to grow flowers," he said simply, "and teach others how to grow them." Some dreams were simple: a bicycle, a happy family, a clean house. Some were big: owning a hotel, painting in Paris, flying across the world. Miss Lewin didn't laugh at any of them. She nodded after each drawing and wrote their names underneath. By the end of the hour, the giant sheet of paper was full of color, full of hope. She called it the Dream Map. Carefully, she pinned it to the classroom wall, right beside the Hope wall. Now, the classroom had two special places, one for feelings and one for dreams. That day, the students didn't feel like ordinary children in an ordinary classroom. They felt like something more, like dreamers, like builders of the future. They stood in front of the dream map during break time, pointing and smiling. "Look at mine. That's your rocket? Your bakery is so cute." For the first time, they saw not just each other, but each other's hopes. In the following days, something began to shift in the room. Students who once didn't care about school began trying harder. A boy who was always late started coming early. When Miss Lewin asked why, he said, "If I want to be an engineer, I need to be serious, right?" Another girl said, "I want to learn English better. I need it for my hotel." Miss Lewin never told them to work harder. She simply helped them see the reason why. Every week, they added new drawings. She made space on the wall for more dreams. Some children even brought pictures from home, of relatives who had followed their dreams. One student brought a photo of her grandmother who used to sew clothes for the village. She didn't go to school, the girl said, but she taught herself to sew by watching others. Miss Lewin pinned the photo next to the drawings and said, "That's what dreamers do. They find a way." One day, a visitor from the township education office came to observe the school. When he stepped into Class 8A, he stopped in front of the dream map. He stood there for several minutes, quietly reading each dream. When he turned to Miss Lewin, he said, "I've visited many schools. I've seen many walls, but this is the first time I've seen one that speaks." Miss Lewin smiled. "It speaks because they do." Before he left, the official asked if he could take a photo of the dream map to share with other schools. Miss Lewin agreed, but only after asking the class first. Every hand went up. "Yes," they said proudly. That day, the class didn't just feel like students. They felt like artists, like believers, like seeds of something bigger than a classroom. And that big, colorful paper on the wall? It wasn't just drawings. It was a window into the future. It was magic. It was hope. It was theirs. Chapter 6. The Girl Who Could Not Read. May always sat in the third row, near the wall. She was quiet, polite, and never caused trouble. Her handwriting was neat, and her drawings on the dream map were beautiful. But there was one thing she never did: read aloud. Every time a teacher called on her to read from a book, she would shake her head or look down. Sometimes she said her throat hurt. Other times, she just stayed silent. Most teachers stopped asking her. They thought she was shy or lazy. Some said, "She doesn't care." Others whispered, "Maybe she's just not smart." But Miss Lewin noticed something different. May listened carefully in class. She answered questions, but only in writing. She finished her homework on time. But whenever it was her turn to read, her hands would shake. Her face would turn red, and she would look as if she wanted to disappear. One afternoon, during a reading lesson, Miss Lewin asked for volunteers to read. Aung Aung, the class clown, jumped up and said, "Let's hear May for once. Come on, May." The class laughed. May froze. Her lips trembled. She didn't say a word. Miss Lewin quickly stepped in. "That's enough," she said firmly. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was strong. The class fell silent. She looked directly at Aung Aung. We don't laugh at someone's silence. Sometimes, quiet people have the most to say. After school that day, Miss Lewin asked May to stay behind. When all the students had left, she sat beside her and said gently, "May, would you like me to help you read? Just you and me. No one else." May looked down, her eyes filled with tears. After a long pause, she nodded. That was the beginning. Every day after school, May stayed behind for 20 minutes. Miss Lewin brought short, simple stories. They read one sentence at a time, slowly, gently, no pressure, no laughing, no fear. At first, May could only read 3 words without stopping. Her voice was soft, her hands shaking. But Miss Lewin never rushed her. She would say, "Take your time. You're doing great." And May would try again. Week after week, they continued. Sometimes Miss Lewin gave her small notes that said, "You are brave," or "Every voice matters." May kept them in her notebook, like treasures. After 1 month, May could read half a page. After 2 months, she began to read with fewer pauses. By the 3rd month, her voice was steady, not loud, but steady, stronger than before. One afternoon, Miss Lewin smiled and said, "You're ready." May looked surprised. "Ready for what?" "Ready to share your voice," Miss Lewin said. "In front of the class." May's eyes grew wide. "I can't." "Yes," Miss Lewin said gently. "You can, and I'll be right there." The next week, during a reading lesson, Miss Lewin stood in front of the class with a book in her hand. Then she said, "Today, someone special will read for us." The room became still. May stood up slowly. Her hands were holding the book tightly. For a second, her legs felt weak. But she looked at Miss Lewin, who gave her a nod of encouragement. She began to read. One sentence, then another, then another. Her voice was soft, but clear. She read one full page without stopping. The story was about a river and a boat and a little girl who found her way home. It felt like more than just a story. It felt like May's own journey. When she finished, the classroom was silent. No one laughed. No one whispered. And then someone clapped, then another, then the whole class. Ong Ong, the same boy who once teased her, stood up and said, "That was amazing, May." May smiled, a real smile, wide and full of light. After class, students came up to her. "You did great. I didn't know you could read so well. You sound like a storyteller." May just nodded. Her heart was too full for words. That day, Miss Lewin added something new to the hope wall. It was a short note with May's name on it. It said, "Some flowers take longer to bloom, but when they do, they are the brightest." From that day on, May read in class every week. She even helped younger students in the library. Her voice became stronger, her steps more confident. She was no longer the girl who couldn't read. She was the girl who found her voice. And because of one teacher, that voice was finally heard. Chapter 7. The Day the Rain Came. The sky was already gray when the students of Class 8A arrived that morning. Clouds hung low over the schoolyard, thick and heavy, like a blanket ready to fall. The wind whispered through the trees, and the air smelled like rain. By the time the first lesson started, the rain had begun. Slow at first, then heavier, then stronger. Drops hit the tin roof like tiny hammers. The classroom grew darker, the sound of thunder rolling in the distance. Some students looked up at the windows. Others sat quietly, hoping it would stop. But it didn't stop. By lunchtime, the schoolyard was a lake. Water flowed across the steps. Shoes were soaked. The electricity cut out with a sharp click, and the lights went off. The fans stopped spinning. Teachers walked from room to room with worried faces. "No one leaves until the rain slows," the headmaster said. "Parents are stuck on the road." Miss Lewin looked around. Some students were cold. Some were scared. Many were hungry. Their lunch boxes forgotten at home or washed away by the rushing water. The bell didn't ring, but lessons stopped anyway. Miss Lewin didn't try to teach from the book. She didn't hand out worksheets or give homework. Instead, she stood in front of the class and said, "Come close. Let's sit together." The students looked surprised, but they trusted her. One by one, they gathered near the front of the room. Some sat on chairs, others on the floor. The rain continued to beat the roof, like music from the clouds. And then, in the dim light, Miss Lewin began to tell a story. "It was a long time ago," she said softly, "in a village not far from here. There was a young boy who lived by a river. Every day he watched the boats pass, carrying people, rice, and dreams to other places. He wanted to build his own boat, not just to float, but to fly." The students leaned closer. "But he had nothing," she continued. "No wood, no tools, no help. Just one small hammer and a lot of hope." People laughed at him. "You can't do it," they said. "You're too poor, too small, too slow." But the boy worked every day, one nail at a time, one piece of wood at a time. A strong wind blew outside. The windows rattled, but inside the classroom, the story held them still. The river flooded one year. Everything was broken. The boy's half-finished boat was lost in the water. He sat by the river and cried. But then a bird landed next to him. The bird had a broken wing, but it kept trying to fly. Again and again it jumped, fell, and tried again. Miss Lewin's voice grew softer. The boy watched the bird all day. It never gave up. And slowly, something in his heart began to beat again. He stood up, dried his tears, and said, "If a bird with a broken wing can try again, so can I." He rebuilt the boat. This time, stronger. And when it was ready, it floated. The class sat in silence. Even Aung Aung, who always joked, had nothing to say. Coco whispered, "Did the bird ever fly again?" Miss Lewin smiled. "Yes." One morning, the boy saw it lift off the ground. Not high, not far, but enough. Enough to reach the sky. The rain softened. The classroom felt warmer, though no heater was on. The students sat close, sharing stories of their own, memories of storms, of struggle, of little birds that never gave up. One girl said, "That story, it's like us." "Yes," said Miss Lewin. "You are the boat, you are the bird, and this classroom is the river. We float together." When the parents finally arrived hours later, the children were dry, calm, and smiling. Some parents asked, "Were they not scared?" And the headmaster answered, "No." Miss Lewin was with them. That evening, as the sun peeked through the clouds and the last puddles shone with light, Class 8A left the school with a new story in their hearts. They didn't just remember the rain or the storm or the flood. They remembered the boat, the bird, and the voice that told them, even in the darkest weather, that they could fly. Chapter 8. The Goodbye Gift. The news came on a quiet Thursday afternoon. A paper from the education office, stamped and signed, arrived in the headmaster's hands. He called Miss Lewin to his office and showed it to her without saying much. She read the first few lines and felt her heart sink. She was being transferred. Another town, another school, a place she had never been. No reason was given. Just the usual line. Teacher placement as required. Miss Lewin nodded politely, thanked the headmaster, and walked slowly back to her classroom. Class 8A was still busy writing, some working on grammar, others drawing on the back of their notebooks. The room looked just as it always did, colorful, warm, alive with little dreams. But to Miss Lewin, something had already changed. That evening she sat at her desk long after the bell had rung. She looked at the hope wall, the dream map, the paper birds they'd hung near the window. Her eyes paused on the desk where Coco once sat in silence, on the corner where May first read aloud, on the spot near the wall where Aung Aung learned how to say sorry. How do you say goodbye to a room full of hearts? She didn't tell the students right away. But word travels fast in schools, and by the next morning, the class had heard the news. No, it can't be. Is it true, teacher? Are you really leaving? Miss Lewin tried to smile. Yes, she said softly. At the end of this week, I've been asked to go help in another town. The room fell silent. That day, lessons were short. Words didn't come easily, not from her and not from them. But the students were not ready to let her go without something more. In the corner of the schoolyard, under the big tree where they sometimes played during breaks, a quiet plan was made. One student brought a small box from home. Another cut red paper into the shape of a heart and pasted it all over the box. A few girls brought ribbon. One boy, usually shy, brought a roll of tape. Together, they built something simple but full of love, a heart-shaped box. Then, each student wrote a letter, one by one, 30 letters, each from a different child. No names on the outside, just folded paper placed gently into the box. Some students wrote about their favorite memory with Miss Lewin, the story circle, the dream map, the day she stood beside May when others laughed. Some wrote poems. A few drew pictures of birds, boats, and flowers. But many wrote things they had never said before. One letter read, I used to think I was stupid. You made me feel smart. Another said, when my mother was in the hospital, I was scared every day. But your smile made me feel safe. And one, written in uneven handwriting, simply said, you made me believe in myself. On the last day, just before the final bell, Coco walked to the front of the class, holding the box in both hands. He didn't speak much, just placed it on her desk and said, this is from all of us. Miss Lewin looked at the box. Her fingers gently traced the edges of the red hearts. She opened the lid and saw the folded letters inside. So many little pieces of paper, but each one heavy with meaning. She picked up the first letter, read it slowly, and began to cry, not loudly, not with pain, but with the deep, quiet tears that come from love. The students didn't say anything. They just watched, some with wet eyes too, some with soft smiles. She looked up, wiping her tears, and said, I came here to teach, but I learned more than I ever taught. You gave me more than I ever gave. Before she left that day, the students gathered one last time. They sang a song, one they had learned months ago during a listening lesson. It was simple, full of hope, and just right for goodbye. As she walked out of the classroom for the final time, the heart-shaped box held tightly in her arms, she turned and said, this is not the end. Your stories go with me, and wherever I go, you'll be in my heart. The wind blew gently through the classroom windows. The dream map rustled softly on the wall. The hope wall stood tall, and 30 hearts watched her go, not with sorrow, but with something deeper, gratitude. She was just a teacher, but she changed 30 lives. Chapter 9. Years later. 10 years passed like pages turning in a quiet book. Class 8A had long moved on. The desks were now filled with younger students. The hope wall had been painted over. The dream map was taken down. Miss Lewin's name was no longer on the school list, but her memory, that never faded. The 30 students had grown up. They were no longer boys and girls in uniforms, waiting for lunch bells or story time. They were adults now, scattered across the country, living lives that once lived only in their drawings. May, the girl who once feared reading, now ran a small library in her village. Coco, who used to sit in silence, had become a teacher himself, gentle, patient, and kind. Aung Aung, the class clown, had trained as a nurse. He now made children laugh in hospital wards to ease their pain. Lin was studying aerospace engineering. Tet worked with orphans. One girl became a poet, another a baker. Dreams that had once lived on a piece of paper were now alive in the world. One day, Coco messaged an old group chat. "Do you remember her?" Everyone knew who he meant. There was no need to say her name. Within minutes, replies came in. "I still have her note. I think of her every time I feel lost. I wouldn't be who I am without her." They didn't plan a big event. There was no microphone, no banner, no fancy lunch. Just a promise to meet again, together, and see her. The journey took them across rivers, dusty roads, and long bus rides. They brought flowers. Some brought gifts, handmade soaps, sweets, a painted canvas. But most brought only themselves and hearts full of memories. When they reached her small house in a quiet town, they stood nervously outside, like students again. Coco knocked on the door. It opened slowly. Miss Lewin stood there, older now. Her hair had more silver. Her back was not as straight, but her eyes were exactly the same. Kind, clear, soft. For a moment, she said nothing, just looked at the faces in front of her. Some had changed so much. Others looked almost the same, but she looked at each one as if time had never passed. Then she smiled. "Aung Aung," she said, placing a hand over her heart. Still standing at the front. "May, the girl who bloomed. Coco, you finally found your voice." One by one, she called their names. Not one forgotten. They laughed. Some cried. They hugged her gently, one by one. "You remember us?" someone asked. She nodded. "Of course. You were never just my students. You were, and always are, my children." They sat with her in the small yard behind her house, under the shade of a mango tree. The air was filled with the scent of flowers. Birds chirped in the distance. They talked for hours, shared stories, told her what they had become. She listened with quiet pride. Not the pride that shouts, the pride that glows in the eyes and makes you smile without words. May gave her a handmade notebook. On the first page it read, "From the 30 seeds you planted, 30 trees now grow." Aung Aung, still full of humor, said, "You're the only teacher who ever made me read without falling asleep." They laughed. As the sun began to set, Coco asked, "Do you still teach?" Miss Lewin smiled. "Not in a classroom. But yes, I still teach the neighbors' children. I tell them the same stories, the river, the boat, the bird." "And the broken window?" Lin asked. She laughed. "Yes, that too." Before they left, they took a photo. All 30 of them, now grown, now full of life, standing around the woman who once gave them more than just lessons. She gave them belief. As they said goodbye, May asked softly, "Do you ever think about us?" Miss Lewin touched her heart. "Every day." And as they walked away, none of them turned back. They didn't need to, because they knew, deep inside, that her lessons had never really ended. They had simply taken root, in their homes, in their work, in their hearts. And even as the years continued to pass, each one would carry her voice, her kindness, and her light into every place they went. She was just a teacher, but she changed 30 lives, and in return, 30 lives never forgot her. Chapter 10. just a teacher. The gathering was nearly over. The 30 former students, now grown and full of their own stories, had spent the whole afternoon with her. Laughter had filled her tiny yard. So had quiet tears. They shared food, memories, and long-forgotten jokes. The sun was dipping behind the trees, painting the sky with soft gold. Miss Lewin sat on an old wooden bench, her hands gently resting on her lap. The heart-shaped box from years ago sat beside her, now worn with age but still filled with every letter, every memory. She had kept them all. A soft breeze moved through the trees. The light touched her silver hair. And then, just as everyone began to gather their things to leave, someone spoke. It was Coco. His voice was quiet, like the question had been waiting for years. "Miss Lewin," he said, "do you know you changed our lives?" The others fell silent. All heads turned to her. She looked up. Her eyes didn't tear, but they shimmered. She paused as if searching for the right words. Then she smiled gently, the same smile they remembered from that very first day in Class 8A, and said almost in a whisper, "I was just a teacher." No one spoke for a moment, because in their hearts, they knew it wasn't true. To the world, she may have been just a teacher. A quiet woman in a plain dress, carrying lesson plans and old books. No headlines had been written about her. No medals hung on her wall. She had no titles after her name, no awards to show. But to them, she was more. She was the one who had noticed when no one else did. She had spoken gently when the world shouted. She had stayed behind after school, after hours, after the rules, to teach, to listen, to believe. She had found voices in silence. She had turned pain into poetry and fear into dreams. She had made a quiet room feel like home, and she had never once asked for thanks. As the group stood around her, they didn't need to argue or correct her words, because they knew the truth in their hearts. She wasn't just a teacher. She was the light in their darkness. The first hand that reached for them when they fell. The quiet voice that said, "You can." May walked forward and knelt beside her. She didn't speak. She simply took Miss Lewin's hand and held it close. And then, one by one, they all came, each of the 30, forming a circle around the woman who had never asked to be remembered, but would never be forgotten. Aung Aung placed a small note in her palm. It read, "To the one who taught us how to dream, not with big words, but with big love." Miss Lewin looked around, and for a moment her eyes filled again, not from sadness, but from the quiet, full beauty of a life that had mattered, not on a stage, not in a book, but in the hearts of 30 souls. As they walked away, the stars began to appear. They didn't look back, because they didn't need to. She had already built a home inside them, a home made of words, warmth, and belief. And wherever they went, whatever they became, a part of her would always go too, because she was never just a teacher. She was everything. You've just finished a very special story, and I want to say, well done. Thank you for reading and listening with us here on Read and Learn English. Let's take a moment to think about what we've learned. Yes, you practiced English today. You saw simple words used in emotional, powerful ways. You heard clear pronunciation, natural expressions, and real human storytelling. But more than that, you felt something. You followed the story of Miss Lewin, a teacher who didn't raise her voice, didn't ask for praise, and didn't seek attention. And yet, she changed 30 young lives, just by being there. You saw how reading can move the heart. You saw how listening brings the story alive. That is the magic of learning English through stories. Every sentence helped you improve. Every paragraph helped you grow. And every chapter reminded you why kindness is a language we all understand. Now imagine this. What if you listened to one story like this every day? What if you read along with every video, feeling each word? Your English would not only improve, your way of thinking would too. Because at Read and Learn English, we believe that stories do more than teach language. They teach life. So please, don't stop here. Watch the next video, read the next story, practice your voice, your ears, your heart. And if this story touched you, leave a comment and tell us. What teacher changed your life? Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Read and Learn English, your home for heartwarming stories and simple English. We'll see you again in the next story. Until then, keep reading, keep listening, and keep learning, because every word you learn is a door to a new world.